typically you end up creating the entire application in the iPaaS kind of a platform, and
Yeah,
it
exactly.
becomes really untenable. Then you realize after a year or so that, hey, this is something that was not supposed to be done. You end up either doing that, or you end up over customizing your ERP platforms, and as a result, what happens? They start going off track.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our number one priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I am Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at the independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. Automating a process is easy, but understanding which process is the right candidate for automation is more difficult than most people think. Also, not every process is the right candidate to be hosted inside an ERP. By the same token, not every process can be as ad hoc as RPA. There is one category that is in between the enterprise-wide cemented processes of ERP and ad hoc processes automated by RPA technologies. It's called workflow automation. Workflow automation inherits approval and transactional elements of ERP and ad hoc components of RPA. And that's perhaps why workflow automation category is so hot. But which are the processes that are the right candidate for workflow automation technologies? In today's episode, our guest Ravi Vaidya shares his insights into workflow technologies and where they fit in the enterprise architecture. He also compares several technologies such as iPaaS, BPM, P2P, and RPA, and why workflow automation deserves its own category. Finally, he compares several workflow technologies such as BoomiFlow, Microsoft Power Platform, and ServiceNow, and how these technologies can help automate the ad hoc processes that drive data and process issues in an organization. Let me introduce Ravi to you. Ravi is an enterprise applications thought leader with a passion to design and deliver differentiated solutions resulting in business growth and operational excellence. He has 20 years of experience in business and engineering, applications, relationship management with business, and running PMO, expertise in leading large-scale business applications projects to achieve enterprise objectives through business transformation initiatives. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hey, Ravi, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Sam. Thank you for having me on the show.
And I am super excited to have you because the kind of insights that you are going to have, especially when it comes to workflow management and the newer trends that we are seeing on top of the ERP platform. So it's going to be so much fun. Just to kick things off, do you want to start with your personal story and your current focus, Ravi?
Yeah, definitely, Sam. And again, thanks for having me on the show. Regarding my personal story, I am deep into modernizing our ERP application for
Very cool.
last few quarters.
Yeah.
And why we took a journey of modernizing ERP applications, because we were seeing users struggling with a lot of manual steps on top of the ERP or surrounding those ERP application that we use. So I work for a company called ServiceNow, which is a SaaS company, and we use SAP as our ERP platform. It's a very rich platform from a functionality perspective.
Right.
At the same time, there are quite a bit of manual steps that needs to be done prior to getting the data into ERP.
Yep.
And then during the process, when it goes through ERP and after the process gets completed. And I come with a lot of manufacturing background also prior to joining ServiceNow.
Yeah.
So we have our order to cash operations, we have our procure to pay operations, and
Yeah.
record to report operations, which are done in the ERP. And I have quite a bit of insights into all those areas.
Amazing background there, and we are going to have a lot of fun discussing all of those manual steps. But before we do that, we have one of the standard questions that we ask every single guest that come on the show, and that is going to be, Ravi, your perspective on business growth.
What I'm seeing is from my perspective, where I am right now. Fortunately, I am in a very high growth business environment, and that brings a lot of good problems to the table to solve. And there are quite a bit of companies who are in the similar situation, where growth is the primary focus for CEOs, CFOs, COOs, and how to manage that growth is important. And the answer to that, how to manage the growth in this digital world is really how do we digitize all these operations, and not just as a hype, but really doing that digitization and what it means, how to move the needle, how to create great experiences for the people on the ground. And that's what fuels the growth. And when I say people on the ground, it is like employees, it is your customers, it is your vendors, it is your partners. Everyone should have a better experience, everyone should have an efficient way of doing any process, and that's what fuels the growth.
Yeah, amazing perspective there. So now we are going to go back to the things that you had mentioned about modernizing the ERP platform. Obviously, there is a ton of modernization that is going on at this point of time in the market. ERP systems are becoming better. There's no question about that. And then there are going to be processes that are going to sit on top of ERP. They are slightly different, and I think you are going to have a lot of perspective there. And there is no question that you come from ServiceNow. ServiceNow has done wonderful job overall in gaining the market traction, the market share, and they have created their own sort of category. Okay, but from our listeners' perspective, if you think about a manufacturing executive, for them it gets really confusing overall. When they are going to think, okay, I already had too many systems in my architecture, and now, okay, are you trying to introduce another one? Okay, come on, are you kidding me? Okay, so that's what they are going to think. But obviously, every system has a role to play in the architecture, and the only reason why these categories are coming up is because there is a need for these things. So when I think of modernizing on top of ERP process, and I have seen this in last 20 years, there have been several different attempts in that modernization. So that's going to be, first people are starting, okay, I'm going to create some sort of BPM. Okay, the BPM is going to bring the human element that ERP traditionally did not have. Then obviously RPA is a big category out there. I'm going to create RPA, it's going to create bots, but now we have the workflow management. So overall, when you compare and contrast these different technologies, and they are probably trying to do similar things as maybe ServiceNow is trying to do. So do you want to shed some light there in terms of where you see the differences in some of these technologies?
Yeah, so good question. And there is a clear differentiator. Let me explain you what that differentiator is. So you mentioned about BPM and RPA.
Right.
Yes, these are good technologies. Or let's start with the BPM first. What BPM really does is it maps your process, and really it's a digital way of or it's the digital way of putting the process steps together, and mapping it who is doing what kind of step. I would say that that technology has evolved now to something called as a process mining, where you really look at the digital footprint in the system for different events that are taking place, and then using process mining you can really map your entire process. Now what does that do is that mapping helps to find out where the manual steps are still existing in your entire process. Now once you know those manual steps, where platform like ServiceNow comes into picture is how to digitize or how to automate those manual steps.
Right.
And what happens typically, even in the manufacturing environment, you are going to have a ERP system, you are going to have a manufacturing execution system, you are going to have some advanced planning system that is going to talk to each other to make your manufacturing seamless and entire supply chain seamless so that your manufacturing can happen in the right way. So where the platform like ServiceNow will play a role, or where workflows play a role, is to automate those manual steps across various systems and also within the system. So that's where the workflow management complements your BPM solution that you may have, or the process mining solution that you may have.
Okay.
Now, when you talk about the next thing that you mentioned about RPA, so what RPA does is it just mimics a program that mimics the manual steps or manual keystrokes that a user is doing actually. So that's what it is. But what workflow management does, or what workflow solution really does, is it actually automates your process end to end. And what I mean by that is, now think of creation of a work center on a manufacturing floor. So you have, let's say, 4 or 5 work centers on manufacturing floor, or maybe a couple of dozen work centers. Now you want to reorganize that whole thing, and you want to, let's say, create more work centers or lessen few of the work centers. So you typically go through all that process over the emails, having different meetings or discussions with your different team members over the emails and all those things. At the end of the day, then you arrive at a solution that, okay, I need 3 more work centers to be created. And you want to go through certain approvals. It may have certain budget associated with it, some machines to be put in there or reorganized and everything. So all that work happens manually, typically in the organization. What workflow can do is, you can just go and create a request for 3 additional work centers to be created. Maybe you can associate related workers to it, budget to it, and all these things. Instead of having these discussions over the email, all these things can be mapped using a workflow, wherein you create a request for work center, you attach all the required parameters or vectors related to that work center. You can run it through the required approvals, and once everything is in place, let's say with a push of a button, you can send that information to ERP, which creates the work center in the system. So that's how it is different than RPA, because using RPA, you cannot do all these processes which I have mentioned related to, for an example, work center creation on the manufacturing floor.
Agree. And I can see the value, to be honest, just because I have lived all of these spaces, and I can see some of the challenges as well overall, the way RPA technology is positioned, the way BPM technology is positioned. And I am going to narrate some of the things, and I am going to rephrase my understanding overall where I have seen, let's say, the BPM technology used, and then obviously you can provide your commentary as well, whether you agree with me, disagree with me. We can have a little back and forth there, right? So in terms of BPM, one of the BPM sort of never had its own identity. That's how I like to define BPM, because BPM has been used in a lot of different scenarios. So number one category where BPM is going to be very prevalent is going to be with CIOs like you, right? Because CIOs, it was sold to CIO as their sort of language to communicate your architectural pattern as the enterprise architecture pattern. So that is one BPM sort of, convention or the notation. That's one way of looking at BPM. But then you had the BPM tools such as Pegasystems or Cordient, or those were prevalent more in your call center scenario. So if you go to, let's say, any of the CRM processes, which are going to be very heavy on the call center, they used to have the human element. Okay, the human element really differentiated BPM technologies from the rest, because we have some other technologies such as iPaaS. Now, how do you differentiate between iPaaS and your BPM? So even in case of iPaaS, if you look at technologies like TIBCO introduced their own way of doing BPM, which was a completely different BPM overall, right? So obviously,
Right.
I can see a lot of different differences, and I can see from my perspective when I was trying to use all of these BPM technologies. Obviously, they were not as friendly to be able to use to be able to create these processes. So, is ServiceNow trying to create something better? Do you want to describe the technology, why it is going to be easier than some of those technologies when you are going to be creating similar workflows using, let's say, ServiceNow?
Yeah, that's another very good and very relevant question, actually, where I get excited about such workflow platforms such as ServiceNow. So it's basically we want to make sure that users are empowered
Yeah.
to think what their process is, and also I am thinking that users should be able to create their own workflows, or so to say, an app on their own using low code or even no code platforms such as ServiceNow. So, where the difference is as compared to these traditional iPaaS platforms or the BPM platforms is it should be very simple in terms of even like a drag and drop process steps. And when you on a sheet of canvas,
Yeah.
if you are able to drag and drop those process steps and connect with each other, and for each of that process step, if you can define this is what my input parameters are and this is what my output parameters are, and in between those input and output parameters, these are the steps, or these are the I'll say logic that I want those to go through so that I can derive at those output parameters, and you will be able to map the entire process. It
Yeah.
doesn't, and I look at that process as sitting on top of your traditional enterprise applications, such as your ERP system or CRM system or MES system, and so on and so forth.
Right.
And it is able to interact with those systems as and when required in this entire end-to-end process. So why I get excited is I haven't come across a platform as ServiceNow before I started working for ServiceNow, which has a capability to do this thing.
Yeah.
So that's really the differentiator. And having those, so stand are the iPaaS platforms like TIPCO, they are little heavy, I will say, for the implementation as such.
Yeah.
Whereas, let's say, how can we have a very simple way of communicating from a workflow platform to
Yeah.
the, let's say, the system of record such as ERP or CRM,
Yeah.
and easily exchange the data at a right point in time so that a user can see his or her process end to end and just digitize it, really feel that, hey, I don't have to do anything manually. It's now completely digital end to end. And that's what is something which I am on a journey to do it for past few years.
Okay, very interesting. So we are definitely going to peel some more layers here, in understanding how the iPaaS is going to be heavy and how obviously, the workflow management category is going to be slightly simpler. So let's say if we look at iPaaS, so you described, what, in the case of your workflow management, if I'm thinking more from my executive perspective, and the whole idea of low code, no code is going to be my CFOs are going to be able to code, right? Obviously, at least I could never get them to code, to be honest. Okay, but maybe
Sure.
I probably need to introduce ServiceNow, and then they'll be able to do it. But let's say if we compare iPaaS and ServiceNow, right? So in case of iPaaS, you said that iPaaS is heavier and ServiceNow is slightly simpler. So obviously, I need some more colors there in terms of why you believe that this is going to be simpler. Now, when you describe the process, you were saying, okay, you have the input, you have the output, you have the process mapping. But that's exactly what you have in iPaaS. Okay. So why do you believe that iPaaS is going to be heavier and ServiceNow is going to be simpler?
Yeah, and the reason I'm saying that is, now let's just take an example of, let's say, master data creation process, right?
Yeah.
So if you think of, and it is a, everybody understands that master data creation is or having a right master data is super important, and it has its own process
Right.
of managing it in a right way. But still, even using these iPaaS platforms which have been existing, it has not been simple to automate that master data management process end to end. And what I mean by that is, again, it's not about creation of a product or a SKU.
Right.
It's not just about creation of a product or a SKU. It's not just about creation of a customer or a vendor record in the system. It's really, what do you need, or you need to get prepared to create a customer or a vendor in a system, or you need to get prepared to create a product or SKU in a system.
Yeah.
And what workflow solution really does is it allows you to digitize those pre-steps in a very simple and easier way. And again, to give you an example of a customer or a vendor, you really want your external partners also to have that simple experience and provide the information really easily.
Yep.
So that is what something like I have been able to do it using workflow platforms such as ServiceNow.
I can see the differentiation, to be honest, okay, especially when you talk about the external customer. And if I'm going to be exposing my iPaaS processes to my external customers, they are going to tell me that now you want me to debug my your code as well, because that's not going to be fun. So obviously there is a real value here overall in exposing the ServiceNow platform or workflow management platform to the customers, because they can engage, interact. But even the iPaaS category, if you look at some of the iPaaS solutions, they have launched their own sort of form creation process. So I don't know, for example, let's say if we talk about Boomi, okay? Boomi has launched their something called BoomiFlow. So I don't know if it is going to be similar as workflow. For example, Microsoft has their own sort of, Power Automate and everything that you have underneath Microsoft portfolio. You can probably replicate the similar things as what you can do in ServiceNow, but obviously customers are buying ServiceNow for a reason.
Yes.
So do you want to touch the differences between, what Boomi is versus
so again, very very good and interesting question, and I will say that these other players are in a catch-up mode. So ServiceNow has a leading edge to the overall workflow revolution that we started seeing. And I will say that ServiceNow really created this platform which is getting used, or pioneered this workflow revolution, and others are catching up because they are realizing that there is a real value in it, and that's what is going to bring the end-to-end process automation, or that's what is really going to bring the digitization across the enterprise world. So when you think about creation of, so the basic to the workflow is creation of a form and attaching the approval workflow to it, or attaching the approval levels to it. That's what really the core of it. And then you should be able to have a right list forms, or right list where you can see all your records in a better way. Now, once you start collecting this information using workflow, since ServiceNow has been doing it for 10 plus years now, and there have been a lot of advancements, and that low code, no code steps that I was talking about, in terms of really thinking on a white canvas, user being able to create the process steps and attaching a form to a process step, attaching the approval steps to it, and easily able to do it. And what you said is right. We are not even though they are welcome to do, CFOs and COOs even to work with a platform and work it out, but it's really your ground level team members who will be empowered to think through it. That what I generally do on my day-to-day life, Sam, is I ask question to my users, like, what is that process steps that keeps them, what is that process that really, I'll say, they get fed up with. Oh, it would have been so good if this would have been just automated. or can I, what is that process that you keep doing repetitively every day, and
Yeah.
you think that, hey, it is just so routine step, why this cannot be automated? And that's where uh, they are coming up with so many use cases. And I have seen folks at a ground level on user community developing those apps at my end. And we provide help from digital technology side wherever help is required or some handholding is required. So it will not be at all an exaggeration if I say that internally I'm just experiencing this workflow revolution on our business,
Yeah.
for our business operations using our platform. And I just see an excitement in general across the organization. And not just that, actually, I do interact with a lot of my peers
Yeah.
across the industry in the IT community, and I see so many IT leadership who I talk to experiencing very similar phenomenon that I explained to you about the workflow revolution.
Yeah, very interesting. So obviously we are going to touch a lot more in that. And the whole argument when people say, things are easy, easy is not always good, at least in my experience. If I think
Uh-huh.
more from the CIO perspective, and I have been in a lot of situations, and typically, look, if you are using a tool for the right job, then you are never going to have a problem, to be honest, okay? Regardless of the
Yeah.
tool, okay? It should be used
Mhm.
for the right job. So I have seen scenarios where they had too many technologies, the team was not as experienced in understanding what to use for which technology to use for what, and then they ended up creating the whole ERP inside their iPaaS layer. Can you believe this? The whole consolidated invoice logic inside
Uh-huh.
iPaaS, and the whole implementation, I think it was like $5 million implementation that failed just because of that,
Yeah.
because they were not supposed to do that. I mean, you are not supposed to
Yeah.
recreate the ERP inside your
Exactly.
workflow automation or RPA or whichever tool you are using. But
Exactly.
here, when you look at, for example, let's say workflow management tool, so I can see some value in this, and you can tell me whether you agree with me on this assessment or not. When I look at these technologies, I look at degree of ad hocness, and I don't even know if that is a word. But when I say degree of ad hocness, what I really mean is, okay, if your processes are going to be permanent, meaning they are always happening the way they are happening, that's where your ERP is going to be the right fit. Now, when your processes are going to be super ad hoc, meaning they are probably going to be right fit for your RPA category, meaning nobody else cares for it. It is really for you. You are simply trying to automate some of the tasks that your AP clerk is facing. That's where RPA is going to be a fit. But then you have some categories, for example, master data management. Master data
Uh-huh.
management is not your permanent process, but it's also not as ad hoc. And that's where I guess the whole workflow management piece can come in, where you need to be collaborating with your customer. Let's say you are accepting designs. Sometimes that could
Yeah.
be part of your ERP, but I think the better candidate probably is going to be the workflow automation tool, where you have a lot of collaboration happening, but you still need the degree of control that you are not going to have, let's say, in the case of your RPA, but ERP is probably too tightly controlled. And again, you want to put something in ERP that is going to be super permanent, that is going to be cemented, and that is going to be part of your financial statements. Do you agree with my
E-
assessment?
So I do agree with your assessment,
Okay.
and I have experienced it also myself, right? Before this kind of a work, looking at ServiceNow kind of a platform as a workflow platform. And when I say that I have experienced it, because typically you end up creating the entire application in the iPaaS kind of a platform, and
Yeah,
it
exactly.
becomes really untenable. And then you realize after a year or so that, hey, this is something that was not supposed to be done.
Right.
You end up either doing that, or you end up over customizing your ERP platforms, and then it becomes like a technical debt with you, and not
Exactly.
just a technical debt. Even I started calling it as a process debt, because the process just becomes so complex, and users don't enjoy more interacting with
I
your
agree.
ERP system or doing transactions in your ERP system. And as a result, what happens? they start resorting to Excel. They start doing processes or managing data in Excel, and then they start inputting the data, and the whole things the whole process I start calling it as start going off track, and then it needs the effort again to kind of revamp the process and all those things. Where I look at the workflow platform is, or I would advise the folks out there in the technology industry
Yeah.
to think of workflow platform as a platform, one platform, which is going to sit on top of your traditional enterprise systems such as ERP, CRM, SRM, MES, PLM, MDM, all those acronyms that we have.
Okay.
And then the workflow platform can sit on top of it. And when you think of all these manual steps that keep happening in all these systems,
Yep.
whether it within the system or before or after completing that transaction, you can really map it as an workflow on top of all these systems. And if you decide on that workflow platform, which can automate these processes, then you will have one platform, which is a single layer of engagement
Yeah.
and action. That's where I have seen a huge benefit of ServiceNow platform for our business operations, that it is playing on top of ERP system. And we have like a few dozen cases which have been in practice today,
Yeah.
which are very useful. And I can give you some examples. I know we have spoken about master data
Yeah.
management as an example of creation of customers, vendors, queues, or on finance side like cost centers and
Right.
GL accounts, which should typically be monitored very closely so that you don't create, I'll say, or you don't create wrong data or transaction data because your master data is not clear. So that is one example. The other example would be also on the transaction side. So for example, you think about accounts payable invoice approvals.
Yeah.
Now, in your ERP system, you don't have an elegant way by which you can really go through your approvals for the invoices
Right.
in a very elegant way. So that's where, if you expose your bare minimum invoice data into this workflow platform and then go through the required approval cycle, it just creates a very seamless experience for the people who need to be involved in this approval chain, and it interacts with your ERP system again in a seamless way on the same platform. It just makes life easier for a technology person as well as for a user who is actually having and going through that experience of, let's say, approving invoice. I can give you one more example on a
Please.
vendor space. Because see, what happens is, and it's very common in every industry, manufacturing industry,
Yeah.
retail industry, chemical industry, oh, you name it basically, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You have to onboard your vendors. And for onboarding your vendors, you typically go through something called as a vendor risk assessment, where you want to collect right information from a vendor in the very easy manner
Right.
that can be done. And besides vendor risk assessment, which are parameters related to the vendor risk, like, okay, how big is the vendor, where do they maintain their data, how they are
Right.
going to use my data, and so on
Yeah.
and so forth. There is other business related information such as, hey, what is your address,
Yeah.
are you a minority owned business, and so on and so forth. There are
Right.
like at least 60-70 attributes that you want to collect before creating the vendor. How can you create an easy experience for your partner vendor to be able to provide that information very easily,
Right.
where you can even automatically populate some of the information based on the data that you can find out even from the vendor website. So those are the kind of things using workflow platforms such as ServiceNow can be digitized.
Very interesting. So now we are going to compare this with another category, and which is very similar, and it could be very confusing for our listeners. So I don't know if you
Okay.
are familiar with platforms such as Qualtrics, right? I mean, there is one category for the customer experience where you are doing a lot of surveys, and the way you describe the
Uh-huh.
process where you are doing the onboarding, the recruitment process for vendors, the survey process could come across as very similar as well if you really think deeply, because there you are sending bunch of questions, you are collecting. Based on that collection, you are creating some sort of algorithm that you are storing somewhere, and based on that you are making the decision. So do you see workflow management platform being used in the customer experience category as well, or the other other way, where customer experience platforms are going to be used in the workflow automation?
So I do see workflow platform very much being used on uh, from the experience perspective. And when I say, what I'm trying to say is, whether it is a customer experience or external party experience, or whether it is an employee experience,
Right.
workflow platforms, they do play a very vital role. Now, when you think about platforms such as Qualtrics, which helps you gauge, I call it as like a sentiment of a customer, or whoever you are working with, and it really gives something like, what is my NPS score based on how I'm interacting with the customer. That's
Right.
what platform like Qualtrics does. So when you deploy a workflow platform such as ServiceNow, using Qualtrics, you will be able to know that, oh, my NPS score has really gone up. So you know the difference. The workflow is the actual execution platform, I will say, whereas platform like Qualtrics is a sentiment measurement platform.
Interesting perspective, and I kind of agree there. The way both of these platforms are positioned, and sometimes there could be overlap, and it could be very confusing for the listeners. And the other confusing part that is always going to be there is, when I talk to my procurement folks, they all are talking about vendor portal. Okay, every system is going to have some sort of vendor portal, and for a customer, let's say if I'm the manufacturing CFO or CEO, it becomes very confusing. Whose vendor portal am I using? Okay, who is going to be supplying vendors to each of those vendor portals? So I don't know where this all sort of fits in the vendor portal category. So for example, let's say if we compare this with the P2P platforms, the only reason why P2P platforms exist on top of ERP is because they make the P2P workflow far easier when you talk about the whole end user shopping experience internally, not externally. The whole vendor onboarding is far easier in the onboarding in the P2P platform. And then finally, the whole RFP collaboration piece. So the P2P platforms have far deeper collaboration features. So do you see, let's say, workflow management piece being used in conjunction with P2P technology, or the other way?
So again, a very good question, and I will say I agree with that assessment also, from the confusion that it creates for the maybe some higher level team members, or even in the user community.
Yeah.
And that's where I think a technology people has to play a right role in terms of educating the C-level team members or the higher level management in terms of what tool needs to be used for what kind of an application.
Right.
And that's where I think, with all this confusion that could exist with multiple systems which are there,
Yeah.
that's where, if you have a thought process at an enterprise level, that I'm going to have a workflow platform which is going to be my by default system of engagement
Right.
for any application or for any interaction, or wherever there is any kind of interaction involved. Now, it is easier said and done. I'm not telling that it's like a magic bullet, right? Oh, you just go and there is a workflow platform and it is just going to solve all your things. That's not my intention. My intention is to have a right strategy to be in place, to have a think of a platform as a workflow platform, which is going to be a system of engagement, and try to use it at maximum places where you can use it. And obviously you will need to do right kind of an assessment. This is where I want to use it. And another point that I want to mention is, you mentioned that this P2P platform, or
Right.
even you think of any B2B platforms actually, right?
Yeah.
They do have a very specific applications. They go, let's say, a deep into one particular area. Now what happens is that when they go deep into particular area, based on my experience, you will find there are certain pieces that are missing, and that's where the manual processes start creeping in. And or that's what I call it as end to end process management. Most of the time my observation is that's what gets challenging, that the process doesn't get end to end digitized. And I am personally on a mission to make sure that when you think about a process, it is really digitized end to end. There is not a single step which a user will be required to do outside that process, or where you can really augment that process with the workflow platform, where you get the seamless experience of not doing anything either on an email or on Excel spreadsheet, and you go into this workflow platform and everything is just available there. You just feel that you don't do things manually anymore, because yeah, you have a system to do it and it's all tracked beautifully in the system.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. So typically when you work with these customers, do you find any specific industries that are going to be slightly better fit for the workflow management? Or in your opinion, every industry should utilize workflow management?
Actually, I would say the latter.
Okay.
Every industry should utilize the workflow platforms for
Okay.
sure, and every industry should think of using this workflow management platform. And I would, in fact, call it this workflow platform as a platform of platforms, which
Yeah.
is interacting with all the other enterprise platforms or applications that you have. And uh, why I'm saying that is, again, think of workflow as any process in your company or in your enterprise that you do. And if you want to automate that process, that's where you think of a workflow management platform. So when you talk about, oh, we want to really go digital 100%, what does it really mean? You think of, even as you walk in the aisles of manufacturing floor, or you walk into your warehouse, or you walk into even in your office lobby, and when you see something is broken, or you know what I mean, anything that where the manual step is there, you just think of, hey, can I workflow it? And yes, it can be done using the workflow platform.
Yeah, so that's a very obviously CIO perspective. They want to automate everything, right? But let's take the a little financial perspective here, because everything has a cost
Uh-huh. Yeah.
associated with whatever we are trying to do. And let's say if I talk about my SMB listeners, obviously for them the cost is going to be one of the elements. Even for the
Mhm.
enterprise
Mhm.
listeners, I mean, everybody has to evaluate whether they are going to get value out of their investment or not. So obviously, if I ask you that, okay, is workflow management going to be fit for everything? You are going to tell me that, okay, it's fit for everything. I get it. Okay. But, I'm going to ask this question differently. So let's say if you were to pick some customers, okay, and you can only pick a couple, which is going to be your sweet spot in terms of the size of the customer and the industries, and you can only pick two in terms of the size. So is enterprise going to be your better fit customer? Is it going to be mid-size, small in terms of industries? Do you have any specific industries where you are probably going to be adding far more value than the other industries?
Yes. So again, a good question. I will give you answer in two dimensions, basically, or I want to answer it in two dimensions.
Okay.
One is from an industry perspective, and one is from the, for a lack of better word, I'll call it an application perspective, actually.
Okay.
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 So from an industry perspective, again, I I think your question is directed towards ServiceNow, definitely. So I'll say telecom is one sector
Okay.
where we have started, where ServiceNow has created a specific industry vertical for that industry,
Right.
and it is getting very, very well received.
Okay.
The other industry is a financial industry, which is nothing but a banking and financial sector, where there are specific solutions that are created to cater to that industry.
Yeah.
Because if you think about all these industries, there is a lot of interaction with the customers. There is a lot of, you can think of it as a case management that needs to be handled. And
Agree.
that's where a platform like ServiceNow is coming super handy. Now, the second dimension which I was talking about is the application. So when I say applications, I want to call it as, let's say, ERP workflows.
Right.
So where we see companies are using ERP solution for years and years, for 10 years, 20 years, more than 20 years also, where they are using the ERP application and it has become super customized. It's very hard to modernize that particular application. It takes time. It takes sometimes a year or 2 years to add simple things on that platform, which is going to make the life easier for a user. So that's where, at least internally, I started focusing on how can I add ERP workflows using ServiceNow platform, which can modernize the life of the ERP users that I have.
Amazing. So that's it for today. Do you have any last minute closing advice or remarks for our listeners?
So my advice to, again, listeners, or remarks to the listeners is, digitization is here. It's real. Think of it very, very seriously, that how you are going to digitize your operations. What does it mean? How are you going to segregate the hype of that word versus what you do actually? And again, I'm happy to interact also. If any, if you want to interact with me even one on one, that's absolutely fine. So that is one. The second aspect, I will say it, think of a business value. Going back to your point that Sam, you have mentioned just now, that everything has a cost associated with it. So it's not going to be free, right? There
Yeah.
will be cost associated with it, but what business value it is going to bring to the table. I would say think of it from two perspectives. One is business scalability and growth,
Yep.
and another one is productivity and efficiency. So workflow platform really plays in those two areas of scalability and growth, as well as productivity and efficiency. And it will prove your organization to go in a right direction when you have a workflow platform available to you to modernize experiences for your employees as well as your external partners that you have.
Yeah, amazing, and could not agree more. And my personal takeaway from this conversation is going to be, I mean, personally for me, I wasn't sure about the value that ServiceNow really brought to the table, to be honest, and the workflow platform, but it has opened my eyes, and there is something to it in terms of the workflow management, and there are some problem areas, especially when you talk about the vendor collaboration, master data management. So make sure you at least review it and pay attention to it. On that note, Ravi, I want to thank you for your time. This has been a powerful episode.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on this episode, Sam.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Ravi or ServiceNow, head over to servicenow.com. It's Servicenow.com. You can also connect with and follow him on LinkedIn. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Megan Gamble, who shares her insights into building the systems for the packaging industry. Also, the interview with Ingo Hageman, who shares his insights into the integration challenges of ERP and e-commerce software. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.